The story is told that many years ago in a small town, there was a man wandering around in the dark one night in a city park. He was kind of known as the town drunk, and this night he was pretty lit up. And in the course of wandering through the park, he stumbled and fell into an open well. Now the good news is he was okay as he hit the bottom and splashed in the water, but the bad news is he couldn't figure out how to get out of the well. He cried and shouted out for help for a long time, and finally in desperation he called out, "God, if you're up there, help me, please get me out of this well." Well, just as he shouted that, a man happened to be coming by, and so he said, "Hold on, buddy," and he went and grabbed a rope and lowered it down and pulled the man up to safety. Well, this man was so thrilled to be rescued from the well that he actually fell on his knees and dedicated his life to the Lord right there on the spot. And then in gratitude for what the Lord had done for him, he devoted the rest of his life to going through the city parks and grabbing drunks and throwing them headfirst into this well so that they could have the same experience he'd had. You know, the good news is that the gospel's for everyone. And it is important that people have an experience with Jesus. But it's vitally important that people be allowed to have their experience with Jesus in their own way, in culturally contextualized ways. I've just come from Thailand, where I was privileged to join some members of the Mission Society staff, as well as a couple of Thai mission workers, in presenting our International Mobilization Conference. This is an opportunity that was afforded to us to train scores of church mission leaders in Thailand in how to reach their people in culturally contextualized ways. One of our presenters was Dr. Ubawan Mejidan, an amazing woman of God who has been doing ministry in Thailand for decades. Ubawan shared with us a story of the early days of the Hmong Thai church in Bangkok. They'd acquired some property in a really sketchy neighborhood. It was filled with prostitutes and crack dealers and gang violence. And on top of everything else, the gangs had begun to just make a mess of the church property, and they were creating havoc all around. And finally, in frustration, Ubawan went to this head strongman from the gang and said, "Listen, you got to do something about these kids. They're making a wreck of everything. They're vandalizing my property. You got to shape these up." He said, "Well, who in the world are you anyway?" And she said, "Well, I'm just here trying to make a difference in this community. I'm giving English lessons. I'm trying to make this community a better place." And he said, "Well, not only will I get these kids in shape, but I'll make them clean up your property. But I'd also like to come to your English classes." And so this man began to show up for English class once a week. Ubawan said that when he would show up, that he came under the influence of drugs every single week for a year. She said he sat in the back, and in the course of an entire year, he only learned one English phrase. "What is your name?" "My name is." That was the full extent of the English he'd learned in a year. But after a year of showing up to these classes, he finally said to her one day, "What are you really doing here? You can't just be here to teach English. Why have you really come here?" And she said, "Well, if you want to know the answer to that question, we have a prayer meeting tonight. You come to the prayer meeting." Well, she said, much to her surprise, he did show up to the prayer meeting, still under the influence of drugs, but he sat in the back with his arms crossed through the whole meeting. And finally, at the end of the meeting, he made a pronouncement. He said, "I have a prayer as well. God, you need to get me a job. I'm giving you 1 week, God, to get me a job. If you get me a job in the end of a week, then I'll believe in you." And with that, he stormed out the door. Dr. Ubawan said that she and the rest of the people at the prayer meeting immediately began to call out to God, "Lord, please, please, I know it's unorthodox the way he prayed, but please give this man a job." Well, lo and behold, the man showed up the next week for the prayer meeting. But this time he wasn't under the influence of drugs. Instead, he was wide-eyed and amazed. He said, "You won't believe what happened. He said, yesterday I was in the heart of the city and a man drove by, a Western man. It turns out he works for Citibank, but the man stopped me on the street and he said to me in English, "What is your name?" I smiled real big because I knew how to answer that. And I said, "My name is," and told him my name. And the man said, "You speak English. Do you want a job?" And on the spot, he gave me a job. Well, that man was so taken with what God had done that he did honor his commitment to not only believe in God, but he became a devout follower of Jesus Christ. The Lord was able to clean this man's life up. And eventually, he went on to become a leader in the Muang Thai church. And today, he's married to a Western missionary and doing quite well in his walk with the Lord. God works in mysterious ways, His wonders to perform. I'm so grateful that people continue to share the good news of Jesus Christ in a variety of ways and that God continues to save lives as a result. I'm grateful to be partnering with all of these mission partners that we have around the world. And I want to encourage you to take a step of boldness and share the story of Jesus in a way that suits who you are and that's true to who you are. You might be amazed at what God will choose to do as you share His story. Thank you for joining us today, and as always, God bless you, and thank you for your partnership with the Mission Society.